Welcome to the 8th Africa Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction Media Orientation. Thank you everyone for joining today. I'm the moderator for this session. My name is Adair Ackley, the External Relations Officer for UNDR Regional Office for Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome today. And first, what I'm going to do is kind of just give you a brief overview of the Hopin platform that we will be using today through the 18th, so that everyone is familiar and can choose what sessions they want to join. After logging in, you can enter the virtual venue of the regional platform, and the Hopin interface is divided into sections. On the left side, you can see the navigation menu, which allows you to navigate the different areas of the site. The middle is the content window for the reception, where you can view the stage, which will say live for when there's live events going on. And then sessions, you can click on the left-hand side as well, which also will say live. And Expo is our virtual marketplace where we have booths that you can tune into anytime during the event on Hopin. Then we also have interpretation, and we have a team ready to answer any questions that you may have on the chat and Q&A. The interpretation directions you can find in the right top-hand corner. The schedule you can find at the bottom to see which sessions you're interested in joining. Now, there are a few that will be on outside of the Hopin platform that are on Zoom, and the Zoom links are included in the schedule at the bottom that you may tune into if those sessions interest you. Now, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Jinty Kirschwood, the head of disaster risk and analysis with UNDR headquarters in Geneva. Jinty, you have the floor, please.
So thank you very much, Adair and colleagues, for this invitation. Just to highlight very briefly a couple of points about our recent global assessment report on drought, which is, of course, particularly of interest to the African region. Essentially, the key point that came out of this is that in this context of global climate change, demographic change and development transformation, we really need to adjust and upgrade how we consider drought as an integrated problem and a systemic risk. Essentially, we need to transform how we manage drought in the region. And I'm having, here we go. Just to give you a bit of an overview on the report, we had three lead authors, Wadid Erian from the University of Cairo, Jürgen Voigt from the EU Joint Research Centre, and Roger Pulwati from NOAA. But what you can see is that actually the report itself was really a global effort of experts from around the world, including many from the African region, and was trying to take a fresh look at why is it that we're having a hard time getting ahead of the curve to manage drought better. And essentially it looked at opportunities for modernizing current understanding of drought. It had a series of 18 case studies, about 6 or 7 of which are from the African region, and I would very much invite you to dig into some of those. And it also looked at how governance systems around drought can be upgraded to help us better manage this risk, which has cascading impacts across society. Essentially, what we see is that drought is not really just about rainfall. It's not about weather. It's really about development choices, about vulnerability, and about the choices we make for sustainable development. But what's also clear is that in the context of climate change, if we don't adjust what we're doing, we stand putting the entire of the Sustainable Development Goal achievement at risk. So it's not a luxury to think about managing the risk of drought. It's really a necessity. The report includes a wealth of information from the best scientists around the world about what we can expect, both currently in terms of drought risk, but also in the climate future. And unfortunately, many of those projections are quite grave, particularly for the African region, underscoring the need for urgent action on climate change, but also for stepped up support for climate change adaptation. And it also really highlights the systemic nature of drought risk. It's not possible to only handle the early warning system or to look at drought as a humanitarian issue. It's essential that we begin to look at the whole systems that contribute to drought, both from the side of agriculture, from the side of trade, from the side of food systems, but also we need to look at how it impacts across different groups, and particularly on the most vulnerable populations. And what you can see in the report and many of the case studies is that some of the consequences of drought extend far beyond things like food security into things like educational achievement, insecurity, and other types of tipping points and feedback loops. Obviously, what you can see is that there's global experience, including from Africa, but really from around the world. And drought is an issue that is affecting everyone, developed and developing countries. But there's also an awful lot of good learning that's happening, including Africa providing useful suggestions to the rest of the world on how this risk can be better and more effectively managed. And so, for example, one of the case studies really focuses on IGAD and looking at that regional approach to better manage food insecurity as part of a more governance type issue that is affecting different communities differently, and particularly looking at some of the issues around, for example, how women and girls are affected, but also how high exposure to drought is increasing vulnerability to other risks in the region. The drought report also has a number of quite practical steps that we hope that governments and others, policymakers, will consider. Building on the IGAD and other experiences, it has some very practical things that governments can begin to do. As outlined in this slide on the drought policy and preparedness process 10 steps. So underneath that scientific rigor, there's also some quite practical information on how to better manage drought and some checklists and policy recommendations that could be implemented around the world. And if I had to sum it up in terms of what should happen now and next steps, essentially the report's calling for more adaptive risk governance. That sounds very, very complicated, but in a sense, it's about we need to start thinking about drought more systemically. We need to get more flexible. We need to be more responsive and looking across our usual silos. And we need to also look at some governance methodologies that can help. This includes, we're calling for the establishment of a global mechanism for drought management and innovative financing, particularly that can dig into some of this systemic risk exposure and look more holistically at the issue of drought. And we're also looking at trying to help national drought resilience partnerships, again, that can break down some of the silos so that public, private, and civil society partners can better work together to find the solutions that are locally suitable to drought. That gives you a little bit of an overview, but I know there are other experts here who can tell you a little bit more about some of the richness of the report, and very much welcome your thoughts, comments, and reflections, and hope that we have a chance to engage around this critical issue. Thank you. Over to you, Adair.
Thank you, Jinty. That was actually particularly interesting, especially the IGAD case study. As everyone may know, that we have IGAD is one of the co-organizers for this event that we have ongoing this week, and we'll have in particular some specialists speaking on various sessions that will include the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center that is based here in Nairobi. Now, I'd also like to encourage everyone to take a look at the webinar that was recorded and we held a few weeks ago that had the specialists speaking on this report, including IGAD case study, and we had the RCHC from Madagascar on that. So please do join in to see that recording if you want more information on the GAR special report. Now I'd like to hand it over to David Owino, who is part of the dhiraj network. And David will share with you about the role of media, in particular Africa, and his thoughts on drought, which is very important right now, especially in the context of Kenya. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. I think so much has been said, but I just want to say that this is the most important DRR event for us to cover as journalists, because all the disaster risk reduction stakeholders, all the disaster risk reduction actors across the continent are, coming together to review what we have done, what we have achieved as a continent and as individual nations, but also to look at what needs to be done. So it is very important for us as journalists to be part of this conversation, not only as observers on behalf of the 1 billion Africans who are looking up to these leaders to come up with solutions, but also to play our part as stakeholders. And one of the things that we will be doing here, other than just covering the event, we will also be making a statement on what our commitment is, the role that we see ourselves playing as stakeholders going forward. And part of that, from what we have received from our different members across the continent, is in regards to early warning and information and education of our audiences. It is a responsibility that we commit to play going forward, not only to play, but also to scale up. Apart from that, there's also been a number of contributions on scaling up responsibility in raising the profile of disaster risk reduction in the news agenda. So this is something that we have been talking about for a while now. We just want to see, how do we stop talking about it and actually make it happen? We all know that in our different newsrooms, it is easy to talk about disasters. It is easy to pitch a story to our editors when it is about a disaster that has happened, but not very easy to pitch successfully stories that have to do with prevention. But this is the ethic that will add value to our audiences, that will add value to the development gains that Africa has made. So moving from just saying that we want to raise the profile of disaster risk reduction to actually raising the profile of disaster risk reduction as a news agenda. It is also important that we report from the lens of solutions. I think the world right now and the communities that we report to are desperate for solutions, and not for more heartbreaks. We already have too many problems, and we are not talking enough about solutions. Over the past 1 year, as a network of journalists, we have embarked on telling solutions stories, solutions journalism, as our contribution to disaster risk reduction. So there are novel solutions that are being done, or that are being, used by organizations and governments and different actors all over the continent, that could be applied in other places or can be scaled up. A good example is what is happening in, currently we have this prolonged drought that we're still experiencing in many parts of Kenya, especially the northern and the southeastern parts of the country. And also, in general, the Horn of Africa, many countries, including Somalia, are experiencing, droughts for a very long time. And many people have been asking that we have greatly improved in terms of, early warning. We knew as early as last year that there would be drought, and it would be a long period of drought. But somehow, when it finally happens, it's still like an emergency. People are still desperate for food, hunger, famine. People are losing their livestock and livelihoods. And what we have been asking is, why is it so difficult to actually do something so that we do not have such problems of people dying and undignified deaths like this, which could have been avoided because we had this information in very good time? So we have also been doing some stories on what different organizations, what different governments are doing. And you will be seeing some of them in our website. But one of the solutions that we found really interesting was that now in parts of northern Kenya, and in parts of Ethiopia, there are certain civil society organizations that are working with communities to plant grass, really. They're developing what they call pasture seed banks. And this is because over time, because of subsequent droughts, even when it rains, the grass does not easily grow back because of overgrazing. The cows or goats, the livestock have eaten everything so that the grass struggles to grow back. There are not enough seeds. What that means is that these lands are hugely degraded. So we are dealing with the problem of degradation, so that there needs to be restoration. But we're also dealing with a livelihood issue here. You do not want people to overuse resources to a point where, they're left with nothing else to do. So from the perspective of ecosystem restoration and the perspective of, adaptation, we found this very interesting. So this is happening in parts of northern Kenya, a place called Isiolo, and also the southeastern part, a place called Tana River. In Ethiopia, the farmers have been doing this for a while now with some civil society organizations. And the next thing now is that it's also a way to prevent resource-based conflicts that have been witnessed in these places for a very long time. So I just want to encourage you to look at all the possible stories that we can get from this conference, to interact with as many experts as possible, and also to look at the global assessment report, which has a particularly very good, solid information on the drought situation, which we should make enough noise about, and not empty noise, but evidence packed noise, because now we have the right documentation. Thank you very much, Adair. Thank you very much, colleagues, and looking forward to great engagement and successful storytelling from this conference. Our colleague Baboloki Semele from Botswana will be representing us in the drafting committee. He's not been able to join us here, but he will be sending us periodic information on that statement so that we can make our contributions as we move along. Thank you very much, and best wishes, everyone.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's very interesting. And actually, some of you may recognize David, as he's one of our Masters of Ceremonies for this week. So you'll see a lot of him this week. Thank you, David, for talking about dhiraj, which journalists, if you're not aware, you can look into joining, and they do have a website, which we will put in the chat. So you can look at their stories that are very focused on DRR, especially in Africa. So thank you, David and Jinty, for giving these overviews today. And we look forward to working with everyone on this week. And please, let's share on social media as well what's going on this week. I'll put as well the hashtags and our Twitter handle in the chat for everyone to use as well. We encourage this. I just wanted to see if there are any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box on Hopin, and we will try to address them. We have got a full lineup this week that will be very interesting, and especially as David was saying, early warning and early action is one of the main themes actually for this week, and we have some dedicated sessions on this and the work that we've been doing with funding from various donors, and particularly the government of Italy, Cruise Initiative, ECHO, and the European Union, who have funded our work these past few years on early warning for multi-hazard risks that we will be having. So check out the schedule, and please continue to follow us. I don't think we have any questions right now. As David was saying, there will be a voluntary stakeholder commitment from the media that will be aired on the 19th, which is the ministerial high-level 7th high-level event, which is a closed session for the ministers. and the stakeholders will provide a recording of their voluntary commitment, which will include the media. So I just want to make you aware of that. Please let us know if you would like to contribute to that, and we can put you in contact with the focal point, as David said, who is representing the media in our drafting committee that is made up of about 20 to 30 persons representing different stakeholder groups that will be part of the declaration that is read on the 19th and for the platform, and then the voluntary stakeholders. So lots of people are going to be contributing to this. Okay, I just see one question for David. How does dhiraj plan to share the solutions to the ordinary citizens who will not have access to videos and internet?
First of all, dhiraj is a network of journalists who report on disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. And these are currently we have about 80, just over 80 members in about 27 countries in Africa. And now what happens is these journalists are, they report for different media organizations in their different countries. And our website and the platforms that we have as an association are just complementary to the work that they are already doing. So this work is being broadcast on different, for example, community radio across different countries. We have members who are online or digital journalists. We have members who work with the print media organizations, television channels across the continent. So yes, we publish the work of our members on our website and through our different social media platforms. But these members are already distributing these stories through their usual, media organizations for which they work. And some of them, they say they're community members who may not be able to access the internet or television. We also have members who work for community media organizations. And I think one of the important things that we need to do is to increase our membership, because the more that we increase our membership, we are able to reach many more communities across the continent.
Great, thank you. As we know, we need informal channels of communication that work in Africa. Thank you so much, David. And now actually we have another guest speaker who has joined us. We have Jeanette Ellsworth, who is the Chief of Communications, Advocacy and Knowledge Management for UNDR. And she's going to tell us why the media is so important when it comes to DRR. Thank you, Jeanette, please.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm calling you from Geneva. So thank you so much for having me in your session today. And sorry to drop in late and to miss David's comments there. So let me just give you a very quick background about myself. I am the Chief of Communications at UNDRR, but I also started my career in journalism, and I worked at the BBC in radio, news and current affairs. So I do understand many of the challenges that journalists face in trying to get stories pitched to their editor, trying to cover the stories that they know are important. And I think this helps to understand some of the challenges when it comes to especially DRR. So in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, there's a very explicit responsibility, not only with member states, which perhaps traditionally is where we see the responsibility lie for DRR, but actually with all stakeholders. And what the Sendai framework proposes is an all of society approach, and that means that everybody's got a role to play in trying to do the right thing when it comes to prevention and resilience. And I want to flag a really important role that the media plays, because of course we all know that the media has this very traditional very traditional role, which is in reporting on disasters and also reporting on the events around disasters. So when a disaster happens, then we have the we have the response, we have the stories about what's happened. And then in the aftermath, we can also have reportage about what went wrong and how we can avoid that happening again. So those are some of the things that we, that journalists can do in the traditional role of journalists, which we know about, which is reporting on issues that affect us all. But there's another very important role that's outlined in the Sendai framework, and that is for the media as a stakeholder. And what we mean when we say that is that the media has a more ongoing role in DRR, in practice, and in bringing people together. And some of the things that we see that the media can do in that respect is be engaged in some of the regional processes, be engaged in the community best practice processes that are going on. You can challenge your democratic representatives to do better, to engage people, to make sure that nobody is left behind when it comes to DRR. And just on that note, we see that the media can actually play a really important role in this, because the media can be independent from government and independent from the forces that are controlling the processes. And in that way, the media has a role as a stakeholder, and not only as the people who report on what's happening. And I think when we look at these two roles combined, it becomes really interesting to see how important the media can play. So I'm not sure how many people here are joining and how much people are engaged with the DRR as a theme. But if we look back to kind of 20 years ago, when climate change was being reported about, and we had environmental issues, and there weren't really environmental correspondents or climate change correspondents, but now of course there are. And so while we appreciate that there isn't the capacity in most newsrooms to have a dedicated DRR journalist, of course we would really all really like that, a UNDRR, but actually when what we are pushing for is for people to become aware of DRR, to have the tools and knowledge to report on DRR, and then you can start to see regular stories through the DRR lens, and that's when reporting becomes really interesting, because in the end, risk is everybody's business. We all face risk, and resilience is also all of our responsibilities. So when you start to look at the regular stories that you're covering in your day-to-day work, and you look at them through a DRR lens, then you start to really be able to get some richness to the reporting, and be able to cover DRR stories even when they maybe don't originally seem like a DRR story. So just a couple of the tools and resources that UNDRR has available to support journalists in this aspect. You've been hearing from David about dhiraj, and dhiraj is one of our kind of pet projects. It's one of my favorites. It's been built. We've been working with dhiraj for several years, and to really build a network of journalists in Africa for covering DRR stories. And in that respect, it's quite unique, because as far as we know, the other regions of the world don't have that. So this is something that comes from the grassroots, it comes from the journalists, it's really journalist driven. UNDRR has supported in different ways, but the association is driving itself, it's driving the coverage of DRR issues in the region. And this is really important, because in the end, the UN moves around, its focus priorities moves, and support moves from donors. But if you have journalists who are interested and trained and capable of covering the stories, then that's how you have sustainability and longevity in a topic. So for us, dhiraj is really the centerpiece of a lot of our work around media. And I would really encourage any of you, if you're not already members, to reach out to David and the team, and to understand more about how you can get involved. One of the other projects that we have is a big training project with the World Broadcasting Union. And we have a resource called the drrhub.org, and on drrhub.org we have a range of resources that are specifically aimed at journalists. So there's lots of free and open resources there. There are little courses you can take. There's descriptions of the hazards. if you want to understand a little bit more about the topic, then you can go there, and there's open resources, there's videos to watch, there's lots of different things to understand more about DRR in general. But then also you can delve deeper into some of the different topics that we have covered there. So, like, for example, the hazards. So some of the hazards are described, and how you might understand them better and how you might report on them better. Then the WBU, which is the World Broadcasting Union, they have members around the world, and those are obviously the national broadcasters. But if you are a member of a national broadcaster, you can also request another layer of training, and there's a login for that where you can go in and you can get access to another level of courses where there are video resources and certificates and training. And we also run live training from time to time that's linked to that course. So there's quite a lot of rich resources that are dedicated to journalists. And then if you already understand and know a little bit about DRR and you're looking to really get into the topic, then I really encourage you to take a look at Prevention Web, because Prevention Web is curating information of DRR from around the world, from lots of different practitioners, from academics, from journalists as well, and lots of different resources there. It's a really rich resource for journalists. That's preventionweb.net. I can share all of those in the chat when I'm done with my presentation, so that you'll have them later on if you want to refer back to them. And I think one really brief thing that I'd like to end on, which is really important, and we're really plead to journalists for your help on this. It's a very well used phrase in English and in other languages, which we use in day-to-day life, which is natural disasters. And we use them to describe the things that are out of our control, such as earthquakes, floods, and these types of things that we put them in contrast to man-made disasters. But I would like to take a moment just to describe to you what we call the No Natural Disaster Campaign. We're making a real push at UNDR and other partners to take the expression natural disasters away from our usage, and especially in media reportage. And the reason for that is because a disaster is actually a combination of the function of your risk and exposure to a hazard. So the natural hazard is the thing that we call the natural disaster. So an earthquake is actually a hazard, and it only becomes a disaster where it intersects with human activity. And I'll give you a very concrete example to illustrate this. It's when if there were to be an earthquake in the middle of the ocean and it caused a tsunami, and it was a really huge tsunami, the likes of which we've never seen before, but actually it was so far remote that nobody was impacted by that, it wouldn't actually be a disaster. It would just be a hazard. And it might seem like it's just semantics and that we're being kind of picky on that. And I can see, I also understand when you're writing that it's easy to fall back on these terms that we know people understand. But it's a really important concept. The reason is, if we use the term natural disaster, we take away our own agency and our control of what we can do in that moment. And UNDRR talks about prevention, and we can actually prevent disasters. That's because we can't prevent the hazard, but we can prevent or reduce the impact of what it has. So there's really no need in 2021 for a hazard to turn into a disaster. We know what to do to protect ourselves. We know what to do to stop the impact of that happening. And so if we can get away from this fatalistic feeling that some of these things are out of our control, and sometimes they're even called acts of God, then yes, the act itself we cannot prevent, but the impact we can prevent and reduce. So that's my final plea to all the journalists out there. Please do think about the words that we're using really carefully. You do have a lot of impact. You do have a lot of influence. And have a look up dhiraj and see if you'd be interested in getting involved in the work that we're doing on the continent. And please do keep pitching your DRR stories to your editors. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Yes, I think that was a great overview of how UNDR works with the media with a focus on DRR lens. And speaking of tsunamis, we have a recording from the webinar that we just held for World Tsunami Awareness Day that you can find under the Expo booth that focuses on what the island nations for the Indian Ocean are doing to prepare for tsunamis and in regards to early warning systems. So please, I encourage you to take a look at that. I don't think we have any further questions for today. And we will prepare all the links that we mentioned and share them with you so that you may further research what work UNDR and dhiraj are working on. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to my panelists for joining today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the Africa Regional Platform. All the best. Thank you.